Okay, good morning. Jeff Light here with our daily look behind the news from the UT Newsroom. This morning, special Comic-Con edition. Peter Rowe, Carla Peterson. These guys know a lot about Comic-Con.
Too much, probably.
I know very little, so I don't even know what questions to ask. Comic-Con's beginning. Is it different every year? Is that the deal?
Well, it's different every year and the same every year, right? I mean, you have some different players every year, you have some different features every year, but the experience has been remarkably static, I would say, for like at least the last decade.
And how long have you guys been covering this? How long have you?
I think between Carla and I, we probably have 40 years of Comic-Con coverage.
40 years? How much Comic-Con is there?
Well,
what year is
Comic-Con
this?
years are like dog years. Each year is 7 or 8 years.
Right, yeah.
No,
they really wear on you.
I think I started maybe in 2005 or so, and I know you started before that.
I started in the 90s at some point.
When was the first? I know you've written the history, which is pretty interesting. When was the first con, as you guys say?
Well, I mean, Comic-Con's very complicated, and the history gets complicated. So the first actual Comic-Con was in 1970, but there were 2 Comic-Cons in 1970.
Oh.
So then when they start counting, you get all confused.
Was
So
it like at the El Cortez? Was that right?
they
or
had
no?
a pre-con at the El Cortez,
Uh-huh.
which was to raise money for the real Comic-Con, which was held at the U.S. Grant,
Yeah.
I think it
Yeah,
was.
I think it was the Grant.
Right. So they did. So they raised money for that thing at the U.S. Grant, and it was very small. They were just selling comic books. They had one room where they were showing some movies. Ray Bradbury came.
Oh, yeah.
And so did Jack Kirby, who was co-inventor of many of Marvel's signature superheroes, like Captain America.
Wow. And so it's in the mainstream media. Us didn't discover it for another decade. Is that what?
It easily flew under everyone's radar for at least 10 years.
And then one year, some journalist said, "Hey, this is a thing that we ought to cover." Were you guys here then? Do you remember that?
No. I think the turning point came in '76.
Oh, that's quite a while ago.
When, 1976, so 70 to 76, not much happening. 76, there's a little booth. The little booth has a poster for an upcoming film from this guy no one's ever heard of. The film's called Star Wars. And people were kind of like interested. But then a year passes, and in '77, people are going, "Oh my God, Star Wars!" The first sighting of Star Wars was at Comic-Con.
Wow.
Right.
Very interesting.
And I think also things picked up a lot in sort of like the early to mid 2000s, because that's when the big movie studios got more involved and the big TV shows really started picking up. TV became, cable came in, so you had a lot of more interesting, edgy shows that, even though they weren't comic book related, they were culty. They had these huge, passionate fan bases like Breaking Bad, like Lost, shows like that. And so that played into the whole fandom, cult, obsession strain that really powers Comic-Con. So
see, that's where that branch
right.
is where it got into the area where it totally loses me. I know nothing about it.
And well, that's when things got really, really super big. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, really, where if there was a pretty high-profile panel, you could probably get into it if you showed up maybe a half hour early. Now, especially with the extravaganzas in Hall H, people line up overnight, and that really, I think, has happened over the last 10.
Probably
or so
the last
years.
decade. To get into Hall H, I mean, the line is several miles long. It just goes out and around, goes from the convention center outside down Harbor Drive, makes a turn, goes along the harbor, goes out to Seaport Village. But it wasn't too long ago. I mean, maybe 20 years, maybe 15 years, where, Jeff, if you decided, hey, you know what,
let's
this
go down
sounds
to the Comic-Con.
interesting,
Yeah.
let's go to Comic-Con. Well, you would get in a huge line to get your pass, but you would get right in.
Yeah, you could walk up the day of, especially maybe on Sunday when things are lighter, and you could probably buy a badge. And now, all 135,000, however many badges, they sell out long before even anybody knows what's going to be there.
To me, like yesterday, we were listening to Mark Ziegler, a sports reporter and columnist, tell the stories of covering the World Cup and the Olympics over the last 30 years. Amazing stories. And just like talking to you, it's the same thing. The crazy logistics, the unbelievable fandom.
Yeah.
The crowds,
Right.
the crowds, the crowds, the
Wow.
crowds.
Okay, so a couple of items I wanted to ask you guys about. So now, Carla, you've written a lot in the last year about the Me Too movement. And starting, I think, 2 years ago, we started seeing some reporting on, hey, this Comic-Con scene is not all it's cracked up to be.
Right.
There's groping,
Right.
people's space being violated, sexual assault, and a sexualized culture
Right.
that's sort of complicated. I guess it's okay. I mean, what are you looking for out there?
Well, I'm going to be looking for, there's a lot more representation of women this year, I think, than there's been in a long time. There's a lot of panels. There's a lot of consciousness about it. The big harassment thing with cosplayers, costume players, happened in 2014. And Comic-Con did take some steps to post sort of a anti-harassment policy. It's on its tickets. It's posted in the venue. And I think also there's going to be a lot of self-policing. I think particularly after Me Too, there's just this consciousness that, that is not okay. And I think there's going to be a lot more cases of fans calling out other fans. And I think that there's just a lot more awareness that, you can take a picture with Wonder Woman if you want, but you can't grab Wonder Woman's whatever. And so I think that people are more conscious of it, and I think there's just going to be a lot more self-policing. And there are a lot of panels really dedicated to women. There's a lot of panels about diversity, LGBTQ, African Americans in comics. I mean, diversity is a huge thing this year.
Interesting.
Well, and diversity has been stressed at Comic-Con for years. So I think what Carl is talking about, that 2014 was a watershed in that Comic-Con recognized that this was going on and really, kind of publicly said, hey, it's not okay. Now, behind us here, there's an image of a cosplayer. This is more typical, I think, of what you see is someone who's really into a character, right? And will have an elaborate costume and maybe do something with their hair, their face, so on. And it's kind of fun, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And people will stop her and say, do you mind, can I take a picture of you? And almost all of the cosplayers are really accommodating.
And that's what they're there for.
Right.
That's a lot of what they're there for.
And I have seen people in very revealing outfits stopped on the exhibition floor. Can we get a picture of you? And they pose, and it's kind of affirming for everyone, right? I mean, the person in the costume is like, my costume's being recognized, and the people taking the pictures are kind of like, wow, look at the workmanship, look at the fantasy that's happening.
Yeah, I do think there's a whole interesting inquiry around that whole area. But let me ask you about something else, because in your story this weekend, when I learned about what it takes to put on Comic-Con, there was discussion of the, if I recall, the ghostwriter of Wonder Woman comics under a man's name who's being honored. When is that, and who is that? I thought that was fantastic.
Okay, all right. Well, Wonder Woman was invented in the 1930s. In the 1940s, the inventor was ill, and he died, I think, in 1946. And so from 1942 to 1946, he hired a former student of his. He was actually a professor of psychology. So he hired a former student of his to ghostwrite the strip.
Oh, I didn't get that. So literally nobody knew.
It was entirely under his name. She did it without any credit. She didn't get paid, right? She was part of this, and it was an exciting part of her life. But then she went off and did other things, right? So she was contacted earlier this year by someone who'd done some research and said, would you come out to Comic-Con? We want to give you an award. She's never been to a comics convention in her life.
And this is happening
she's
when?
94.
When is this happening?
It's happening Friday night at
we
the
gotta be
Indigo
there, right?
Ballroom. We will have someone there doing video and talking to her.
Oh, but just her story, even though we've captured some of it, let's just tell that all over again. That's fantastic.
A sweet story.
Okay, that's enough for now. A little appetizer of Comic-Con. Thank you both so much. We'll see you back here tomorrow.